listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the NFL free agency and draft preview for Monday, March 23rd, 2020. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
Well, as we clamor for something to do and something to talk about, the NFL has provided us with that opportunity to have a sense of normalcy. Brian Blessing and Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet. We're in Las Vegas, and we've got a handful of key guys that are still out there, but an incredible week last week, Bruce, on many levels. But from the NFL specifically, where free agency is big every year, but this one took it to an entirely another level.
Yeah, just because the way it was received, Brian, in the sports marketplace, which is so desperate for any sort of news, any sort of with no games going on, we need something to talk about. But the NFL at least gave us something like it normally would this time of year, and that's all this free agent stuff. And it was a particularly active early round of free agency. And so most of these teams now have made their moves. There are still some guys out there left. We can talk about them in just a minute, but there are still some key names out there. Most of the big guys have moved. Some trades have already been made. Then we can more accurately start, I think, to forecast the draft, what's going on within the next 2 weeks, because teams will have made moves previously to address some needs through free agency, and that always impacts what they do in the draft as well. So a better draft preview could always come after free agency, and that's what within the next couple of weeks we get into that as well.
Since we last convened, there have been several moves of note, and we'll get to those. But I would just ask you just to revisit it as things have settled in a little bit, specific to the Patriots and Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay picks up Brian Hoyer, so he'll come back, and he'll serve as the backup to whoever it may be, if it ends up being an Andy Dalton, if Stidham, or they do something in the draft. We've got Brady down at Tampa Bay, and the weapons he has to throw to are intriguing, Bruce. But you know what? I mean, on paper, it looks wonderful, right? But that offensive line was nothing to write home about, and Brady's lack of mobility, they were able to it's going to be so intriguing just to see how that pans out specifically for him, because I think as great as Brady is in the latter years of his career here, I think Belichick and the system, they worked hand in hand. For Brady to go to Tampa Bay, I think the jury, and we're going to see a lot of them. I bet you they're on primetime TV at least 4 or 5 times, but I'm not so sure. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it pans out.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think it's a slam dunk at all that that Brady is going to all of a sudden ignite Tampa Bay. Now, what I think when just looking at the stat, forgetting that it's Brady and whatever gravitas he brings to this organization that is badly in need of it, but just the turnover thing. We talked about that last week, and his ability to avoid mistakes, which has been a hallmark of his career. Since 2015, he's thrown only 29 interceptions. Since 2015, last year, Jameis Winston threw 30. And he also had 12 fumbles on top of that. And this team lost a lot of close games last year. So you would think just flipping that dynamic a little bit ought to help the Bucs out. But it's not always that easy. It doesn't translate that easy. It never does. And, yeah, I think there are some questions. Brady, yeah, he's outside of the New England cocoon. He's still got to learn a new system. He's got weapons here. But, he is now into his 40s. And, yeah, there did seem to be some signs last year that he was slowing down. The other intrigue is getting him to work with Bruce Arians, which has got Arians very, very excited. And we know Arians has an awfully good track record, even though it didn't seem to work too well with Winston last year. A lot of people around the league think this could be an intriguing combination if Brady has a lot left in the tank. We'll just have to see. But I don't think it's a sure thing that Tampa Bay is going to hit on all cylinders just because they made this deal.
One that would be curious to me, and full disclosure, I back the Bills, follow the Bills very closely. Bruce, the majority of his sports-loving days has been a follower of the Denver Broncos, and we figured Melvin Gordon, that wasn't going to pan out after they signed Eckler with the Chargers. But I think there were teams out there. I think you were looking at Atlanta, Miami. There's actually to this date now debate whether or not the Bills actually did tender an offer to Melvin Gordon. But of all places, he lands in Denver, 2 years, $16 million. Nice player, but, I think this is a team that's got a lot of work to do. And I don't know, is that a luxury item maybe that they didn't necessarily need?
It seems like it might be. I would have thought that Denver's done a few active things in the trade market. They addressed a couple needs on defense via trade with Jerome Casey coming up front, the lineman from the Titans, A.J. Bowie on the corner from Jacksonville. But they've lost some pieces on defense too. Most of that defensive line is gone from last year. And offensive line needed some attention, and they did sign Glasgow out of Detroit, but they've lost some guys too. Connor McGovern signed with the Jets, and there's a lot of shuffling going on up there. So, yes, it did surprise a little bit. I think, especially since it would have seen the one position where Denver still seemed to need some help would have been at a wide receiver spot opposite Cortland Sutton. I don't know that they're planning on using Gordon together with Phillip Lindsay, but Lindsay's a 1,000-yard back each of the last 2 years. And they've still got Royce Freeman there. The running game didn't work all that badly last year for Denver. Gordon is perhaps an upgrade, but like I said, I don't know that they needed him as much as they need still some other positions. There's a thought, too, that Gordon just wanted to sign in Denver, and whether, Buffalo may or may not have actually offered him something, there was probably some discussion going on, but in the end, if he waited a bit, and Buffalo was going to offer, or anybody else, they would have offered something, and it might not have mattered because I think he just wanted to go to Denver. We have heard this in the past that a lot of players like going there because the way, even with the stuff that's gone on in the organization the last few years, it's a pretty good place to play. They treat the players well. The facilities are top notch. So I think that might have played into it somewhat. That's what I'm hearing, that he just wanted to go there. Maybe also to play in the same division and stick the Chargers. I don't know. There may still be some sure there's still some bad blood after all that contract stuff last year. But, I'm 50-50 on this deal from a Denver point of view. It's nice to get a top-notch player like that, but it's in a position where they were already pretty good, and there's still some other areas where they need help.
One of the other bigger moves that was late in the week, the Lions traded the cornerback Darius Slay to the Eagles, and, many people inside the game are they're overflowing in their praise of this guy that says, so many of these other cornerbacks play in zone systems, but this guy's a man on man lockdown kind of guy, and wide receivers and other cornerbacks in the league rave about him. The Eagles gave up a third and a fifth to get him. He goes to Philly, and I don't ever sleep on the fact that I love Schwartz as a defensive coordinator, and to see if Wentz gets back on the beam the way he was before that knee injury a couple of years ago. So I think a good deal for Philly, but the thing I wanted to ask you about is everybody on the way out the door, and they've always been treated like a punchline. Matt Patricia is getting carved like a Christmas ham from every guy that's not there anymore. Is that sour grapes? Is there really something going on here that at some point you go, this just ain't going to work?
I think it's more the latter, Brian, and we've seen this before from Bill Belichick disciples.
There's only one Bill Belichick.
There's only one, and there's a lot of guys trying to imitate him. And now, I guess you could Bill O'Brien, and he was part of his career. Whether he did coach under Belichick, but grouping him with the Charlie Weisses and the Romeo Cornells and the McDaniels and the Eric Manginis and the others who have failed. Maybe so, but I think Patricia looks like he's in line to follow in the Charlie Weiss mold here. We've heard that about him. He alienated a lot of people right off the bat there. A lot of people were surprised that he and general manager Bob Quinn didn't get the boot after last season from Martha Ford, the owner. In her 90s now, but she has swung the axe indiscriminately in the past. She changed front office and got rid of Jim Caldwell, the coach who didn't perform as badly as Patricia a few years ago. Now, Patricia, we thought last year, if he had a mulligan, he was going to be able to use it, and that was that Matthew Stafford's injury. And the quarterback situation really evolved last year, and they were using David Blau, the free agent rookie from Purdue, by the end of the season. So that did give him sort of an excuse. They played okay the first month and a half last year, and then things started to go bad when Stafford got hurt. So I think in the end that saved him. But I think it's what you say, Brian. It's more the latter of those two options there that, where there's smoke, there's fire here. There's something not going with Patricia, but there are so many of these Belichick disciples who continue to fail. And Brian Flores is one who showed some promise last year down in New England, but a lot of the others down in Miami, but a lot of the others have failed even in the front office types with the Belichick connection. So, and teams seem to keep dipping into that pool to find their new guys. And a lot of us wonder why you're doing it.
A lot of these moves are kind of cap situations, saving big money on roster bonuses and things of that sort last week. A name guy that got let go was cornerback Pierre Desir by the Colts. And the Jets wasted little time, scooped him up. And the Jets have been very quiet in free agency. So the draft's going to be a big deal for them. It's funny, in New York, I guess it's all relative. Maybe if you're really good, you go to the front of the line. If you're both bad, the Jets do get treated, I think, a little second fiddle to the Giants. But the AFC East, again, is kind of an open endeavor this year. And I think the Dolphins making all these big splashes, so much depends on, do you draw a line through Darnold and the mononucleosis and the way that season started out, but they finished strong. I think the Jets could be maybe one of the most under-the-radar teams people should pay attention to a little bit.
Well, yeah. I mean, they did win 6 of 8 last year, and you're right. Darnold missed like a month early in the season. So that was a kind of a quiet surge they made at the end. A lot of people thought Adam Gase was going to be out, and maybe he still will be, but they've given him another year. They have been pretty active with what they've been doing up front, and their offensive line is like they brought in almost a whole new offensive front. We mentioned McGovern from Denver, Van Roten, guard from Carolina, George Fant, ex-basketball player from Western Kentucky. He's been at Seahawks for many years, offensive tackle, 3-year deal for him. Alex Lewis comes in. They bring him back. So this is an offensive line that has been sort of remodeled here in the offseason, so they're not exactly sitting on their hands. And, we'll see. Maybe, yes, I think the fact they look like they might have turned a corner last year. Sometimes late season surges are a bit deceiving, but it makes you think, the Jets might be on the way up. Buffalo's certainly already there, and Miami showed great improvement in the second half of last season as well. So it's not just the Patriots and the three dwarfs anymore in the East. It's a real race now, and all these teams have something maybe to say about it.
It's funny. I can tell you who might be a sneaky fantasy football home run for a lot of people. The Saints, they reload. They keep Brees for a couple of years. They keep Taysom Hill, their quarterback in the future. They go get a safety, Malcolm Jenkins, and they get DJ Swearinger, another safety. So doing a little work on the defense. But then they get Emmanuel Sanders, 2 years, $16 million. And I will tell you, Bruce, for a guy I think that deserves a boatload of respect, is I think if you signed Emmanuel Sanders today and threw him out on the field Sunday, if you were going to play an important game, he'd make a contribution. He's just terrific. And if he stays healthy, that could be a home run signing if Brees has another big year in store.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it also gives them another the guy really jumping up and down is Michael Thomas the other way. He had more than 100 catches, more than any other Saints wideout last year. I mean, not to mention the great year he had measured against anybody, but they didn't really have another wideout who was doing anything. It was all him. It was all Thomas. So he's got to be happy with Sanders. Listen, he is one overthrow by Jimmy Garoppolo in the Super Bowl.
Super Bowl winning catch.
And an all-time hero because he beat the Chiefs on that. He was open in the end zone and about 2 steps too far that throw, or he's the hero. Prior to that, he kept Denver's passing game afloat. And when he got hurt in recent years, especially in 2018, that's when that offense really died out in 2018, the year Keenum was in Denver. Yeah, I mean, he's an impact player. And like I said, Thomas is jumping up and down for joy the other way. Thomas will take a lot of the catches there, obviously, but he'll make Sanders is going to really balance the field better. And that's a great signing for the Saints.
No, and the funny thing is, you bring up a great point. So much of this, hey, we got a great player, but I mean, if you get truly getting a player that's going to benefit you, it's not just that he's good; it's the impact he has on those around him. And I would say for the Bills, it's kind of a correlated thing you're talking about with Sanders and Thomas. Last year, John Brown, who was always like a nice weapon to have as a deep threat, well, he shows up in Buffalo and ends up being the guy and has over 1,000 yards receiving. And they only were able to get over the top to him maybe 2 or 3 times during the course of the year because he was the only deep threat, and Beasley was really good underneath. Now you bring a guy like Diggs who comes in. Both of those guys now, I think, reap rewards. And it's actually a little-known footnote I was reading. I mean, as of today, the Bills are the only team that have 2 wideouts that had over 1,000 yards last year. So, those 2 guys of their own accord are really good, but their presence on opposite side is going to open doors for them even more, open doors for the underneath stuff and the tight ends, and then the fear factor could get the running game going. So it's not just that a guy, he's a nice player. It's one player can impact 5 positions on the field.
Oh, yeah, and you get a quality established guy. And in a lot of cases, I think that's a better way to go than gambling on the draft. No matter how good a guy looks coming into the league, you're still not quite sure he's going to be able to perform at this level. I mean, sometimes you're sure if it's a real blue chip draftee, but there's first-round picks who come in and don't contribute as well as people think. So lots of times. And in Buffalo's case, you got an established big-time receiving threat in Diggs. And like I said, they did upgrade anyway last year. And, Brown and Beasley. And it's now the weapons are there for Josh Allen. So the pressure is on Allen. And I think Brandon Beane is fortunate. They were going for Odell Beckham Jr. last year, and he ended up
and Antonio Brown.
So they were trying to get a couple of these guys, which a lot of people were last year. But I think more trouble than they're worth, as it turned out. So Buffalo's very happy. I think the way things turned out, they've got better citizens there. They got now pieces seem to be in place. It is all up to Josh Allen now. Is he ready?
Yeah.
Can he take the next step? But he's got the weapons, and Diggs really was a primo addition.
It's funny. It's kind of a different thing. Still on the Bills here for 1 second, but how it would play out to others, and the draft is coming. So you're sitting there, you're saying, "Oh man, what did you give up? Look what they paid. They gave up a first, a fourth, a fifth, a sixth, and they're sitting there. So basically, they were supposed to draft 22nd, Bruce. And at the end of the day, that's the formula that added up to moving from the 22nd pick up to number 18 in the first round. So instead of taking a swing at one of the unproven rookies, you're getting one of the top, let's say 10, I guess. Maybe, I don't know if it's higher, but at the very least, let's say a top 10 wide receiver in his prime. So you're getting a proven commodity. And it's all based on where you stand and how your team is built. And you want to build through the draft. You never want to squander picks. But even though on paper it looks like they gave up a lot, at the end of the day, not really, because they were using a first round on a wide receiver anyway. So when you do a deeper dive into it, you look at the price, and some people get knocked off their bar stool. It's not necessarily the case.
If Diggs performs as they hope and expect, then for Buffalo this is a win trade. Now Minnesota is probably happy too.
They are. There's I think this is a win-win.
It is. Minnesota's thrilled about this deal because they thought they're going to have to move him, and they got a draft pick haul. But as far as Buffalo's concerned, this just matters if Diggs is going to be able to perform, and that's that's the whole deal. And sometimes you can make a deal like that. And you're right. They don't have to now. I mean, he takes the place of that, first rounder they were going to hopefully pick on the fifth or sixth best receiver in the draft, as opposed to an established NFL force. So I think it works out well for both, like you said.
And the funny thing is, from a betting perspective, Bruce, Diggs specifically is gone, but you had Diggs and Thielen and Rudolph. You had wonderful weapons through the air. But, Zimmer's an old school guy, run and stop the run. And Cousins would have big games, and then Cousins would make, Cousins kind of mistakes, but they're sticking with him. I think a lot of this, too, is, a mindset where I think Minnesota is just going to up the ante, and they are going to work through the draft and build this defense and say, look, we got two great running backs. We're going to run the ball. We're going to run down your throat. I think Minnesota, which was a team with those kind of weapons, was capable of big points. I got a funny feeling, Bruce, at the end of the day, when knock on wood, we're playing football this fall, I think these guys are going to turn into a dead under team. Yeah,
it seems to be that's the direction they're headed. And as Zimmer has kind of taken more control of this offense, and this actually began back in late 2018 when things were struggling a year and a half ago with Cousins and DiFilippo got fired before the season was done, and then Stefanski promoted, and then it was running really more of a Zimmer type offense, and which would be more a ball control. He wants to run the ball. Dalvin Cook, emerging, keeping him healthy, I think is really the most important thing with that offense. But yeah, that's what they want to do. They have had to make some moves on the defense. I mean, Everson Griffin just leaves here. Weatherly, Xavier Rhodes. There've been a lot of pieces on this defense for them to move around too. But it's a pretty good defense, and that's what Zimmer wants. So I agree with you. I think this could end up being an under team this year, and it looks to be this. They want to run the ball, and that's no secret about that.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. Hey, Circus Sports, last week we talked about this. We had season win totals out now, which I think was a brilliant move. In the AFC South, we touched on this, Bruce, but again, like maybe with just a little reflection time, you've got the Titans are just about 2-1 now. But the Colts are plus $1.35, making them the favorite in the AFC South. I think the Rivers thing will work there. I think they'll be fine. And they were built to be a real contender last year before Luck retired. But I'm just a little curious. Do you think there's a little lack of respect on the Tennessee front? I mean, do you think people were thinking, that was a nice run? I don't know that smoke and mirrors would be fair, but I wonder why people aren't believing in what the Titans had. Not only, keeping Tannehill and Derek Brown. I'm telling you, Bruce, their wide receivers, their wide receiver core is ridiculous. And a little known hidden deal, the second half of the season last year, the Brown kid was unbelievable. He was up there with Michael Thomas as the best wide receiver in football.
Sure. I mean, and Henry is such a force that he was. Yeah, I think this is a little bit of an overreaction. And everybody's, throwing Houston out the window now too, just because of the Hopkins trade. They thought it was a bad deal, but I mean, Houston has won this division many times in recent years. They've still got Watson, and it's still formidable. Listen, I think this deal with putting Phillip Rivers in there is far from a solve-all for Indianapolis. At this stage of his career, he really dropped off last year, and he was a mistake machine. And we've said this before, if it wasn't for Jameis Winston, we'd be talking about what happened to Rivers and all the mistakes he made with the Chargers last year. Now, I am not sure he's, at this stage of his career, that he's an upgrade from Brissett. I'm really not. And Brissett last year, yeah, I know as the season went on, maybe teams figured him out a little bit. But maybe, I mean, there were other things going on with Indy too. A lot of injuries last year. The offensive line was banged up. They had, injuries all across the roster there. And that was a team sitting in playoff position into December last year. I think this is an overreaction to thinking that Rivers is still the 4 or 5 years ago Rivers from last year. If he plays like that this year, this season with the Colts, they're not going to make the playoffs. And he's that move. I am really questioning how much of an upgrade that is for the Colts. So to answer your question, yes, I think they are disrespecting Tennessee too much. I would pick the Titans over the Colts right now. Because mainly I'm just not sold on the Rivers edition. Really not.
I love doing this. I mean, we're bouncing around a little bit, but I mean, that's how fluid this thing is. And it's just fun to talk about this stuff. But I'd be very curious as I was scrolling through while you were talking and looking at the Rams, Bruce, a team that, not that long ago was a whisker away from winning the whole thing, looked like they were built to be a monster for quite a while. Then the play calling gets suspect. Goff got hot at the end of the year, but he was a disaster most of the year. No longer Todd Gurley. Brandon Cooks is supposedly on the market. Man, tell me what's going on with the Rams.
Well, they missed the playoffs last year, although this year that would give them the 7th spot. And so if they took an extra team, the Rams would have snuck in last year, but they did drop way off. My gut feel is that Belichick laid out the roadmap to deal with the Rams in Super Bowl 52. And when they really slowed down, they slowed down, the whole operation there, maybe a Super Bowl 53, when the 13-3 game, and that seemed to lay out the roadmap for people to deal with this offense. Goff did have a few big games this past fall, but his form was very up and down. And like we mentioned during the year, too much tinkering with this offense by Sean McVay. Goff was throwing 45, 50, even 60-plus times, and too often disdained what seemed to be a capable infantry with Gurley. Now, Gurley has moved on, and I don't know. He might have been damaged goods, but I don't think he was ever moved. But curiously, a lot of Rams fans I know were not happy that they made Wade Phillips the scapegoat after last year. I know the Phillips defense dropped some last year, but McVay quickly made him the scapegoat. There is one other thing about the Rams here too. I think this is sort of a red flag. Les Snead, the GM, win now philosophy, okay, but they have dealt away a lot of future draft picks for immediate help, like the Jalen Ramsey deal last year. They remind a bit more than a bit of George Allen's notorious, the future is now wheeling and dealing half a century plus ago. He did the same thing with the Rams he ended up doing with the Redskins long ago. And Snead, the Rams have dealt a lot of draft picks, a lot of good draft picks away the last couple of years with all these moves that Snead has made. And frankly, I don't know that Goff is worth that huge deal they gave him either. I've got real questions about him being a top-tier quarterback. And this is another example of something teams sort of figured out the Rams a little bit last year, and it went back to the Super Bowl with Belichick and McVay's offense closed down the flanks here, and this stuff wasn't working as well. So I've got questions about the Rams. Yeah.
I'll wrap it up with this. You and I are in the same age bracket. And all right, so I'll run the risk of being I'll take one for the team here being accused of the grumpy old man, get off my lawn. But the draft on April 23rd, this is going to be in a ballroom or a conference room or however they do it. In a weird way, I'm really looking forward to it. Sometimes less is more. How this thing evolved, and it was always in New York, and they boo the Jets and they boo the Eagles and that kind of. Now it's turned into this big raucous road show and all the bells and whistles. At the end of the day, you're focused on the picks, and that's fine. It's an event for certain cities. We know it's not going to happen in Las Vegas. But from a drama perspective, Bruce, I would say this to you. I think this could be a lot of fun. I remember that the quarterback draft of the year with Marino and Kelly and Elway and all that. That year was so unbelievable with Pete Rozelle going up to the podium and I think this draft could be really. It's going to be really different. It'll be unique. Probably the last time we ever see it. where they're turning the clock back 30 years here. But I think it could be really compelling, and maybe young people would actually get a kick out of it because we've seen it before.
Oh, yeah. I mean, first of all, the drafts and all, I mean, back into the 60s, I mean, it was the leagues would hold their drafts before the previous regular season ended. They'd be, when the AFL and NFL were warring, I mean, they'd have the drafts in December, and it was like a footnote in the sports page. And then into the early 70s, after the merger, it became a little bit of a bigger deal, but there wasn't any television of it. And when there were afternoon newspapers, there's another thing that dates us. You'd kind of rush home and you'd wait for the afternoon newspaper that would give you the first 10 or 12 picks from that morning. And that was it. And then News Talk Radio at 15 and 45 after the hour, you wait for the NFL updates. It wasn't until ESPN came in 79, and nobody had ESPN in the early days. Very few people did. And then the 80 draft was the first one that they televised. But within a couple of years, that was like one of the first big thing that ESPN had. And for years, though, they were holding it just it's the Marriott Marquis for years, Brian. But way before even moving to the Radio City Music Hall was a big deal when they did it, because it just was held in the hotel ballroom for a long time. And that's how we remember the early ESPN televising before NFL Network. And I'm looking forward to that look back. I kind of think, it's a little too much over the top with the fans getting in there, but I'm listening to you talk, and I'm telling you, I do this to the sports book directors all. If you did this, or you could do a prop on this, and then you can see on the other end of the line, you're going, yeah, thanks, okay, it's work. But you have all these unique ideas. I know you're in the midst of working on a book. That might be a good one, like some sort of history of the draft and the backroom dealings, and maybe even back to the AFL, NFL days, fighting over what league are they going to go to? Like, where did O.J. Simpson, is he going, all these things. That might be a really cool read. Well, it is. I'm thinking about it because I know the drafts when the merger happened, so the 67 draft would have been the first draft after the merger. And so that they pushed that after the season. But it was always in January for a long time. I mean, the drafts didn't move this, mid-spring thing for a long, long time. And it used to happen January, then December, and then into January for a long time. I mean, I think also ESPN, if they've got, and I'm sure they've got some of these leading up to the draft, looking for programming, should televise some of the old drafts, kind of interesting stuff, just old names, and see guys they used to have on. Paul Zimmerman, remember him? He used to be on all the time. And the old ESPN. Jim Simpson was the guy who was their first anchor of their first draft show back in, I think March of 80 would have been the first ESPN draft show. And that was, I think if they could air that, they'd get good ratings for it. He's Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet. Fun talking football, fun talking sports, Bruce. We'll take every little opportunity we can, right? Absolutely. NFL's still giving us stuff to talk about. So as long as they're giving us stuff, we'll talk about it. All right, bud. Great stuff as always. We look forward to chatting again soon. Let's make some money tonight. Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com, and reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling. An approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.